I'm the Executive Director of the Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence, also known as Cardv. Thank you for the invitation to do a presentation this evening, and thank you for your time volunteering with United Way, your organization. I'd like to just, the handout that I'm just sending around outlines the services. Cardv has been in the community for 30 years, providing emergency services for domestic violence and sexual assault victims. And there's a variety of services. What we're asking United Way support in, the City of Corvallis support is for the shelter services specifically. We have 14 beds in the City of Corvallis, and overall we see about, what we're anticipating is 681 people that will serve next year with shelter and support services. Those support services are helping them through the court process with restraining orders, meeting people at the hospital, and helping connect them with the other services. I really wanted to start off with just a more of a broad overview in the work around domestic violence and sexual assault. It really takes this coordinated community response. Cardv is one piece of that. And I've just moved to the community last October and joined Cardv. I'm very impressed with the amount of services, the number of nonprofits in the area, and the communication between agencies. So Cardv's role in that coordinated community response is that safe place to go for someone. When the police respond to a domestic violence incident on site, there's often that night an arrest doesn't happen, or there's not enough reason to arrest someone, but the police know that that's not a safe place. They're really thankful that there's a safe place to take a victim to or to refer them to. We do a lethality assessment program with law enforcement where there's cross-training. All the advocates are trained, law enforcement is trained in order to determine the situation. If it is a situation that could lead to a lethality, the advocate is called in and we respond on site with all of the law enforcement in the area. I wanted to address a couple of the questions that were suggested that you might be interested in. Specifically, the money that we're looking for from the City of Corvallis is $50,000. We were funded at $38,500 last year. And the funding supports over 80% of our budget is in personnel. The rest of it is telephone, utilities for the shelters, to provide support in that way. But it's mostly the personnel costs. We're looking at potential 25% cuts in our government funding, including state and federal. And so if we were looking at a reduction in the United Way funding as well, we would be facing probably a reduction of 2 FTE in our staffing. And what that would translate as is just limited access, that we currently have 24/7 staffing, that there is somebody on site 24 hours, 7 days a week. If we lose 2 positions, we would still be open. The shelter is going to be there. One of the questions was, how sure of your success? With 30 years of a really strong program, the shelter will be there and it will be available. And we mark our success by feedback surveys that we give to everyone that comes through the shelter and all of our support groups. And so we can measure, gauge how well we're doing in our services. So we know that the service will be there, but you might not be able to come in that night. You might have to go to a hotel or a motel rather, and it could be a delayed response. It's not ideal, so we prefer to, of course, keep the level of service that we've been providing consistently in the area. I wanted to make sure to mention the expansion that Cardv is looking at. I don't know if any of you have heard in the news that we've launched a public campaign. We're doing a capital campaign, the first ever in Cardv's history. Next year we'll be building an advocacy center. It's a collaboration with Willamette Neighborhood Housing Services. They're building a 24-unit affordable housing development on 3rd Street. Cardv will build a building on site that will provide supportive services to the permanent housing. And I just wanted to mention it as I think that it's an incredibly model, visionary program that Cardv is doing, that while every community really needs an emergency shelter and to provide those shelter services, it's as essential as police services, fire services. You should have a shelter for victims to go to. We'll continue providing those services, but now after 30 years, we also clearly know that more is needed. At the time shelters started, they were really critical. The police response wasn't really strong. The laws weren't really strong. A lot of that has changed, and more of that is in place. Now what's really needed is that long-term support, and that's what we're bringing in with the Advocacy Center. So we'll be able to take people that are staying in the shelter and offer them a real option to go into permanent housing while their shelter stay. So the timeline on that is breaking ground hopefully this July, and the services will be available in April next year. So with that, can I ask if there are any questions, comments?
So you take in whole families, so they're children too,
Yes.
but you don't take in teenage boys, right?
We don't have a firm rule against it. We'll look at it on situation by situation. They're very small. We have 2 houses actually. The 14 beds are split up between 2 houses. And so it would really just be assessed on what the circumstances of that teen boy is at the time.
And so do you serve men and women was my question.
We do. We serve men and women equally. If I could just expand on that a little bit, the majority of people we hear from are women. The majority of victims in domestic violence situations are women. We have had circumstances where a man has needed shelter and we're able to provide hotels for that situation.
Where on 3rd Street is the Advocacy Center?
It's at Alexander Court.
Which is,
And so if anyone knows where Le Schwab is, it's actually, there's a lot right next to Le Schwab. And
in Southtown?
it's in Southtown.
Okay.
Between Les Schwab and the trailer. What?
Do you have one person on 24 hours in each one of the shelters? Is that what?
And it's just one staff position, not in each of the shelters. It's one staff position available. So she's staffing the hotline. If she gets called to the hospital, she'll be there. If she goes to law enforcement, we have a backup system in place. There's always somebody on the hotline.
Oh, I guess maybe you could talk about how, you said that the person might be responding to the hospital. Under what circumstances would that happen?
It's mostly sexual assault victims, and Corvallis, Benton County has a really strong response program by having sane nurses available. However, when a sexual assault victim goes to the hospital, it's a bewildering experience, not only for them, it can also be for the people that really care for them, that might be going to the hospital with them. So whenever a victim shows up at the hospital, an advocate at Cardv is called, they show up on site and give the victim the option of speaking to them or not. Sometimes they will and sometimes they won't, but there's a much greater chance if they're on site rather than suggesting that the person who's been hurt is going to make that call. So we'll be there. A lot of times it is just working with the family around the victim to explain the dynamics and the reactions the person might be having to the assault, of what's going on. Certainly providing the victim with all the options of where it goes from there, of letting her know what it might look like in a court process, should there be a prosecution, what other services are available to help her in healing from the assault.
If there's no more questions,